billionaire's wife walked into her own kitchen at 5 in the morning, saw a strange woman lying on the floor with all 3 of her babies, and screamed loud enough to wake the entire house. But the woman on that floor wasn't stealing anything. She was the only reason one of those babies was still breathing. Her name was Celeste Ashby, and she lived in a stone house in Saddle River, New Jersey, with a driveway lined in old oak trees and a security gate that opened with a fingerprint scan. Her husband, Roland Ashby, had built a chain of private airports across 3 states, the kind of business that made his name appear in magazines Celeste never read. They had triplets, 2 boys and a girl, 6 months old, named Wells, Sage, and Poppy, and for the first time in her adult life, Celeste Ashby felt completely and totally out of control. That morning, coming down early for water because she couldn't sleep, she flipped on the kitchen light and found a black woman she barely recognized lying flat on the hardwood floor. And lying across that woman's chest and arms were all 3 of her babies, tangled together, eyes closed, not moving. Celeste didn't think. She screamed, "Before we go further, quick question. Where are you watching this from tonight? And what time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments below. I love seeing where all of you are watching from around the world. And if this story already has your heart racing, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a good cry today." Now, back to the story, because what happens in the next 60 seconds changes everything. The woman on the floor was named Nadine Cross. She'd been hired 6 weeks earlier as the overnight nanny, recommended by an agency that specialized in high-needs infant care, after Wells, the smallest of the triplets, born 4 minutes after his siblings and nearly 2 pounds lighter, had come home from the hospital with a warning label attached to his entire existence. The pediatric specialist had used a term Celeste couldn't stop thinking about at night: apnea of prematurity. It meant Wells sometimes simply forgot to breathe. His tiny lungs would pause, sometimes for 10 seconds, sometimes for 20, and there was no machine in that mansion, no matter how expensive, that could promise it would catch every single pause in time. Celeste's scream brought 2 security guards running down the hallway, so fast one of them nearly took the last 3 stairs in a single jump. Roland came sprinting out of his office in bare feet, his laptop still open behind him, mid-sentence in an email to Tokyo. And in the middle of all that chaos, Nadine Cross sat up slowly on the kitchen floor, careful. So careful not to jostle the 3 sleeping babies still tangled against her, and said the only thing that mattered in that entire moment. "Don't shout," she said, low and steady, even with security guard hand already reaching toward her shoulder. "You'll scare them. Just give me 1 second. Please." Something about the calm in her voice, the complete absence of panic in a room full of panicking adults, made everyone freeze exactly where they stood. Roland stepped forward first, his heart still hammering, his mind racing through every worst possible headline his lawyers would have to deal with by morning. "What is going on?" he said. Not really a question, more demand wrapped around fear. Nadine looked down at Wells, who was pressed skin to skin against her collarbone, wrapped in nothing but a diaper and a thin blanket, his tiny chest rising and falling in slow, steady rhythm. "Your son stopped breathing 11 minutes ago," she said quietly. "I caught on the monitor. I've been counting his breaths every 60 seconds since." The kitchen went completely silent. Celeste's hand flew to her mouth. Roland's whole body went cold, standing there in his bare feet on his own kitchen floor, staring at his son's chest rising and falling against a stranger's skin, understanding for the first time exactly how close his family had come to something unthinkable while he was upstairs answering emails. Stay with me here, because the story behind why Nadine was on that floor and not called for help the normal way is the part of the story that nobody expected, and it will completely change how you see her by the end. If you haven't hit subscribe yet, now's a good time, because this story only gets deeper from here. Nadine explained it slowly, still not moving, still counting under her breath between sentences like the number mattered more than anything else in the room. She said that around 4:40 that morning, the baby monitor app on her phone had flagged something, a pause longer than Wells's usual pattern, the kind the machine was designed to catch, but sometimes missed by a second or 2, and in a baby that small, a second or 2 was everything. She'd run to the nursery, scooped him up, and done exactly what she'd been trained to do for moments just like this one. Skin-to-skin contact, firm and immediate, because a baby's own body will often respond to the warmth and heartbeat of another person faster than any machine can respond with an alarm. I brought him down to the kitchen because the tile floor there stays cool, and cool air helps stimulate breathing in some preemies, she said. I didn't want to leave the other two alone upstairs, not with everything happening, so I brought all three down together. I've done this before, Mr. Ashby, 3 times since I started. I always meant to tell you in the morning, once I was sure he was stable, so I wouldn't wake this whole house up over something I already had under control. Roland's mouth had gone dry. 3 times, he repeated. Wells has stopped breathing 3 separate times in 6 weeks, and nobody told us. I told the day nurse each time, Nadine said. I assumed it was in his chart. It wasn't. A gap in communication between the overnight staff and the day staff meant that 3 near emergencies had happened in that house and been quietly, competently handled by one woman on a kitchen floor, without either parent ever knowing how close they'd come to losing their son in his sleep. Celeste sank down onto a kitchen chair, her legs no longer able to hold her up, staring at her tiny son's chest rising and falling against Nadine's skin, and something inside her cracked wide open. Relief and horror and gratitude all crashing into each other at once. Why didn't you wake us? Celeste asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why didn't you scream for help the second it happened, instead of just handling it alone every time? Nadine was quiet for a moment, and when she finally answered, there was something old and tired in her voice, something that had nothing to do with being up all night. Because 11 years ago, she said, I was watching my sister's baby, my nephew, for one night while she worked a double shift. He was healthy. No warnings, no risk factors, nothing in his chart. I put him down to sleep, just like the doctors always say to. And when I checked on him 2 hours later, he wasn't breathing anymore, and no amount of anything I did brought him back. The kitchen went silent in a completely different way now. After that, Nadine continued, I trained. Infant CPR, apnea monitoring, everything the hospitals offered caregivers, because I promised myself I would never again be a person standing in a room not knowing what to do while a child's chest went still. I worked for a family in Florida for 2 years after that, and their baby had episodes just like Wells does. I handled him exactly the way I handled tonight. Quiet, immediate, no panic, because panic wastes seconds a baby that small doesn't have to spare. But the mother in that house walked in on me once, holding her son on the kitchen floor, just like this. And she didn't ask questions first. She screamed, called me a liar, said no nanny does what I was doing unless something sinister is going on. She fired me before the sun came up, no explanation given a chance, and I lost a little boy I'd grown to love like my own, plus every reference I needed to get hired again. Roland closed his eyes. Celeste's tears were falling freely now, silent, streaming down her face as she looked at this woman who had spent 6 weeks quietly saving her son's life over and over, terrified the entire time that telling the truth might cost the job the way it had before. So this time, Nadine said quietly, looking down at Wells' small sleeping face, I decided I'd rather handle it myself and explain everything once he was stable and safe than risk a repeat of what happened before. I know how it looks. A strange woman lying on your kitchen floor at 5 in the morning with your children. I understand why you screamed, Mrs. Ashby. I really do. I just needed one more minute to be sure he was okay before I had to explain myself to anyone. Celeste got down off the chair, knelt on the kitchen floor beside Nadine, a woman she'd been ready to have physically removed from her house 60 seconds earlier, and gently touched her son's small back, feeling his breath, steady now, warm and alive under her fingers. I'm so sorry, Celeste whispered. I'm so sorry, I screamed. You don't have to apologize, Nadine said softly. You're his mother. You were scared. That's the most natural thing in the world. But here's the twist that turned this near tragedy into something that would eventually reach millions of people. The part of the story that nobody in that kitchen could have predicted that morning. Roland Ashby didn't just thank Nadine and go back to his email like nothing had happened. He sat down on that kitchen floor in his pajama pants, a billionaire cross-legged on cold tile at 5 in the morning, and asked to walk him through everything. Every warning sign, every technique, every single thing she'd learned in 11 years since losing her nephew. He recorded on his phone, not to prove anything, but because he subtly understood that this knowledge, Sitting quietly inside one overworked, underpaid overnight nanny was worth more than every specialist he'd already paid a small fortune to consult. Wells's actual pediatrician was called in later that morning, and after reviewing everything Nadine described, confirmed what she already knew. The gaps in his breathing were serious enough that they needed a proper apnea monitor installed immediately, real medical equipment instead of phone app, and a written protocol shared with every single caregiver in that house. So nothing would ever again depend on one woman's memory and quiet vigilance alone. Roland didn't stop there. 2 weeks later, sitting in his office looking at Wells's medical file, he thought about how many other families out there, families without private nurseries and unlimited money for specialists, might have a baby just like his son, quietly slipping through the same dangerous gaps, with no Nadine cross-lying on a kitchen floor to catch it in time. He funded a program that year, working directly with Nadine as an advisor, training overnight caregivers and new parents across hospitals in New Jersey and Florida on exactly the techniques she taught herself out of grief 11 years earlier. He made sure every single caregiver who went through that training got paid properly for their expertise, something Nadine herself had rarely experienced in over a decade of quietly saving lives in other people's homes for wages that never matched what she carried on her shoulders. Nadine herself became something more than a nanny in that house. Celeste insisted on it, over Nadine's own quiet protest that she didn't need any title, didn't need any recognition, that she'd only ever want to keep the children safe. But Celeste wouldn't hear it. You spent 11 years punishing yourself for something that was never your fault, Celeste told her one evening. Months later, the two of them sitting together in that same kitchen, Wells finally strong enough to be off the overnight monitor, sleeping soundly upstairs with his brother and sister. You saved my son 3 times before I even knew there was danger. You don't get to disappear into the background of this house, like you're nothing. You're the reason he's alive. A year after that first terrifying morning, Roland stood up at a hospital fundraiser in New York City, in front of a room full of doctors, donors, and new parents who had come to the training program Nadine helped build, and told the whole story from the very beginning. The scream in the kitchen, the truth on the floor, the 11 years of grief that had turned into something that was now saving other people's children across 2 states. I almost let fear make a decision that morning that would cost my family the person who saved my son's life, Roland said, his voice steady but full of something raw underneath it. My wife screamed because she saw a stranger on the floor with our children, and any parent in that position would have done the same thing. But underneath that fear was a woman who had already lost everything once, and instead of walking away from children forever, she turned that loss into the exact skill that would go on to save 3 of ours. That's not luck. That's not an accident. That's a person who chose again and again to turn her worst day into somebody else's miracle. Nadine stood near the back of that room, the way she always tried to stay out of the spotlight even now. But this time, when Roland found her with his eyes and the whole room turned to look, she didn't shrink away from it. She let herself be seen, finally, for the very thing she'd once been afraid would get her fired. Wells Ashby is 2 years old now, a loud, wild, perfectly healthy little boy who chases his brother and sister through that same New Jersey mansion, like the kitchen floor where his life was once quietly saved, is just an ordinary place to play hide and seek. Nadine still works with family, though these days she trains other caregivers more often than she works nights herself, passing down 11 hard-won years of knowledge to people who might one day be exactly what another family desperately needs at 5 in the morning. And every single year, on the anniversary of that terrifying scream in the kitchen, Celeste Ashby sends Nadine flowers with a small card that says the same 6 words, every time, without fail. Thank you for staying on the floor. Because sometimes the people who save us don't announce themselves with sirens or headlines. Sometimes they're quiet. Sometimes they're scared to tell the truth because the truth cost them everything once before. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to listen instead of scream, you find out the stranger on your kitchen floor was never the danger at all. She was the miracle you almost sent away. If this story moved you the way it moved me writing it, that's exactly why I keep telling stories like this every week. If you made it all the way to the end, do 3 things for me right now. Hit that like button, subscribe so you never miss the next story, and share this with somebody who needs a reminder today that quiet people often carry the loudest kind of love. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.